Accounts created with fraudulent intent can cause problems in almost any industry. With social media, fake accounts are used to spread misinformation. With marketplace, gaming, or on-demand services, fake accounts are heavily associated with credit card fraud. In the financial services sector, a fraudster might use a blend of real and fake information to practice what is called synthetic identity fraud. No doubt about it, these fake accounts are bad news. Fortunately, there's a digital identity step you can now add that occurs seamlessly in the background without providing additional friction. Hello, and welcome to this audio webcast titled, Dear Future, It's Me, Fraud. How to Identify and Combat Evolving Fraudulent Activity. Brought to you by TeleSign and IDG. My name is Tom Schmidt, Digital Content Director at IDG's Strategic Marketing Services, and I'll be the host of today's webcast. Joining me is Stacy Stubblefield, TeleSign's co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer. An acclaimed entrepreneur, Stacy currently helps to drive TeleSign's research and development efforts. Hello, Stacy.
Hi, Tom. Happy to be here.
Also joining me is Irfan Tareen, Global Business Leader for Identity, Fraud, and Compliance at Equifax. Irfan has vast experience in working both as a practitioner at global payments companies and as an innovative solution provider. Welcome, Irfan.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Before Stacy and Irfan jump into today's program, a quick look at our agenda. We'll begin with Stacy telling us about TeleSign, who they are and what they do. Then Irfan's going to provide us with an overview of Equifax, and we'll hear how TeleSign helps protect Equifax's users. Next, we'll learn about TwoFactor Authentication and Score. Score is an identity solution that delivers reputation scoring based on digital intelligence, traffic patterns, machine learning, and a global data consortium. And then we'll hear about fighting future fraud, how to anticipate fraud before your opponent can strike. Finally, we'll conclude with a few questions for our speaker. So, Stacy, let's begin with the TeleSign story.
Great, Tom. I am excited to tell it. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. People might be asking, who is TeleSign? So let me give you a little bit of an overview. We are both a communications and identity company, so specifically mobile identity. Basically what we do, anytime you sign onto a website and you need to get a PIN code, either to register for the website, to log in, whatever it happens to be, we provide that service. So we provide the text messaging service behind the scenes, and then we also provide information to the company who's sending you that message around the phone number that you entered in to make sure that you're not a fraudster, you're not a bot, make sure you're a real legitimate person. We've been doing that for about 15 years. So we started in 2005. We work with a bunch of big companies. So even though you may not have heard of TeleSign, you've almost certainly interacted with us. We work with 21 out of the top 25 largest web properties in the world, and we send over 1 billion transactions monthly. So somewhere around 15 billion transactions a year, and we cover over 230 territories. And then besides sending two-factor authentication messages, which are those text messages with PIN codes, we also do other forms of communication, so sending other types of text messages, alerts, notifications, etc., and also, various voice types of interactions, so people can use our platform to build, like IVRs and various voice communications. So that is what TeleSign does. And let me just sort of jump into the background here. We were founded in 2005, so we've been around for quite a while doing this. Really sort of, started the what you see now with phone numbers being really the identifier on many accounts around the world. When we first started, we were only doing two-factor authentication via voice. We added text messaging and had to learn that whole industry very, very quickly, which, let me tell you, was quite a challenge. Due to, fraudsters being extremely extremely adaptable and learning how to get around two-factor authentication in various ways. We had to augment the system with phone information. So we added that in around the 2010 timeframe. A lot of information around phones, phone data intelligence, really led the way in that space. And then expanded our services out to being more of a communications provider, so a CPaaS, communications platform as a service, in the 2016 timeframe. Basically, the way that happened was we had spent so much time and effort making our two-factor authentication SMS delivery as reliable as possible and as scalable as possible, which is much more difficult than it sounds, that we had our clients coming to us and wanting to send other types of communications. So we opened our platform up so that other forms of communication could be sent. And that is what was happening in 2016. And then in 2017, we were purchased by a company called VIX, a large telecom that you probably haven't heard of, very similar to TeleSign in that you probably interacted with them but didn't even know it. They're the fourth largest wholesale voice carrier in the world, and they do a lot of connectivity between telecoms, meaning, if you're calling from the United States to Portugal, there's a good chance that they're helping to connect that call. They also connect data and roaming as well. So if you're roaming in another country, there's a good chance that they're enabling that. So when they acquired us, they expanded our ability to work directly with carriers because they have something like 700 direct carrier connections, which has given us an amazing opportunity to reach out directly to carriers and get information and data, especially as it relates to identity and fraud prevention type of information from carriers around the world, which has been amazing.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. Terrific overview. Irfan, can you tell us about Equifax and how TeleSign is helping to protect your users?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, Equifax is a global data analytics and a technology company. It's very much a part of the fabric of our lives in the way that we interact with it as end users. We have a strong belief in the fact that we do provide actionable tools which run global commerce. And we also believe that with the knowledge assets that we enable, people are able to live their financial best lives. In a nutshell, that's what Equifax is, and that's what Equifax does. Specific to the interaction that we have with TeleSign, and specifically within my role at Equifax, which essentially protects internal assets at Equifax, we have a fiduciary responsibilities to our users in the way that their information is accessed and used. So there's a high bar on unauthorized access and prevention of unauthorized access. So that's what the team focuses on in terms of strategy and some of the execution and modern day tools that we put in play. Where our paths crossed with TeleSign was really instrumental in our global expansion. And when I mean global expansion, I'm talking about the modern tools that we applied to risk controls and risk mitigation that we put in place. As you can imagine, we have multitudes of relationships, largely being a North America-based company. A lot of these relationships were U.S.-oriented. So as we look for partners, both in terms of their footprint and their coverage and the quality of their tools, some of the ones that we already have relationships with were not necessarily meeting our needs at that time. So TeleSign, at that instance, which is within this year, became instrumental to our global expansion. And as a part of that global expansion, not only the delivery of the SMS that Stacy alluded to, but some of the tools in terms of scores that TeleSign has available, we use those as well. And we found a material benefit of those in terms of like approximately a 20% lift in the authentication rates that we could present while preserving a false positive rates and incoming fraud into the platform fairly flat. So that's been quite successful. Looking forward, we obviously have designs in further global expansion, and with a partner like TeleSign and their global footprint that they have, it allows us to sort of get into other geographies as well. And then I believe that they'll be a significant contender in any other global expansion strategy that Equifax has in this space. So specific to our current usability of TeleSign, it's being used in Canada, and it's being used in our consumer business, growing into our workforce solution business. Some of the vectors we're using TeleSign in is a registration use case. Within the early part of next year, we're looking for that to grow, both not just into the registration use case, but in other user flows, such as forgot password and reset login and any kind of profile or sensitive information change. So those are places where historically we may have used like knowledge-based answers. And in a world in which through social engineering and data breaches, that information is readily available, tools such as the ones offered by TeleSign, coupled with our intelligence and some of our internal data assets across both the registration flows and some of the other flows, has been a significant improvement in the way that both we do adjudication and on the user experience. So those are the kinds of things we're looking to do, is to grow this into further flows and grow this across different assets within a given market we're using them in, as well as future market expansions that we'll do globally.
Excellent. Thanks, Irfan. So, Stacy, who knew that protecting identity and data could be a love story? Tell us about the value of two-factor authentication and SCORE.
Yes, so happy to talk about that. So two-factor authentication and SCORE work really well together, and it's something that we actually get questions about quite a bit. But so let me explain a little bit how they work together. So two-factor authentication is done when a PIN code is sent to a phone number. Now, what has happened is that fraudsters, as they do, they have adapted quite a bit to the two-factor authentication flow, and they have found some weaknesses both on the registration side and on the login side that I will talk about, and we'll also talk about how we're addressing them with SCORE. So on the registration side, basically what fraudsters do is they have found phone numbers that they are able to sometimes use to get around phone verification, meaning they acquire anonymous cheap phone numbers. And so what SCORE does is it identifies those phone numbers. It can tell our clients, hey, even though this looks like a legitimate mobile phone number, it probably isn't. And, we give a high score for phone numbers that are probably not legitimate. And then our clients can decide how to use that information, whether they're not going to allow that phone number at all, which some of our clients do, or whether they're going to basically quarantine that user, go ahead and let them register, but put them on, a lower tier so that they're not able to access any sensitive data or any sensitive functionality. So that is how SCORE is used on the registration side. On the login side, what has happened is fraudsters, really specifically for very high-value targets, have found ways to take over somebody's phone number temporarily. And the way that they do that is actually quite difficult. So it's not something that you can do on a mass scale if you're a fraudster. But if you really have somebody that you want to target, you can find their phone number and then go to the phone company, pretend to be them, and convince the phone company to basically swap out the victim's SIM card and give you a SIM card that links to the victim's account. Basically, if you're the fraudster, you tell the phone company something like, hey, I'm Bob, who is the victim, and I lost my phone and my SIM card, and I need a new one. And so then they give you that new SIM card, and you're able to access Bob's, phone number temporarily until Bob figures out what happened, right? And so then theoretically, if you have the username and password, you can go and log into an account. And so that happens, again, on very high-value accounts. And the way that we are addressing that is by sourcing information around SIM swap. So when was the phone last changed to a new SIM card, and phone number port. So when was the phone number last ported to a new phone company, because that's another very similar way to take over someone's phone number. And that information is available both separately and then also as an integration to SCORE for the login use case. So this is how SCORE is really supporting the security of the 2FA flow. And at the same time, 2FA itself and seeing the transactions as they are happening across our broad user base really gives us a good indication as well as to how risky or safe a phone number is, because basically, long story short, fraudsters don't typically look like good users. And so they have certain patterns that we can pick up across our customer base of 2FA users. And so that information also gets fed into SCORE. So it's a virtuous cycle, as we like to say.
Stacy, let's look ahead. What about fighting future fraud?
That is a really good question, and something that everyone really needs to be thinking about, especially now with COVID having moved so many people online and so many different services online. The attack vectors are just widening, right? Or excuse me, the attack surface is really broad at this point. And what we're seeing is fraudsters, I mean, no surprise, they don't give up. They don't, you put a new block in front of them and they look for a new way around it, right? They're pretty set on not having, a legitimate job. This is their job. And so they get very creative. And so what we've seen is, fraudsters using the same types of tools that businesses use, right? So they're actively using cloud providers to spin up new servers and get new IP addresses. They're actively automating a lot of what they're doing. They, in some cases, are using ML to learn patterns that companies are using to try to detect them and get around that. They're always doing something new. One of the newer things that I've heard, and this is not so sophisticated, but very creative as they typically are, is fraudsters going in and using financial aggregation data. So, you go onto a website. I don't want to call any particular websites out, but you can go onto a website and hook up your bank accounts and see all of your financial information. And typically, this is generally fairly safe because no actual transactions can take place. It's just a lot of information. Well, what the fraudsters have done is they've figured out that if they get your credentials, but they can't log into your account because you have various types of protections on it, they can link your bank account to one of those financial aggregators. In some cases, those aggregators show your account number and they also show the transactions. So what they do is they grab your account number, they link it to a bank account that they have access to, and then they get the verification transaction amounts, those small, several cents, 21 cents, 14 cents or whatever, that's used to link the account. They pull that information out of the financial aggregators to complete the link, right? So now they have access to your bank account. So there's always something new going on. They're always looking at new and creative ways to use the new tools that are coming out in order to continue with their fraud from wherever they happen to be in the world. So that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Wow. Great insight.
To supplement and help, right? So I think, Stacey, you're spot on. A couple of things, right? One, this being a fraudster's full-time job, they're also not subject to blackouts and freezes or whatnot. They're kind of working on the clock. And then the adaptability patterns are pretty nimble and novel on the part of the fraudsters. I think the other piece, specifically the example you used in terms of microdeposits, this is one place potentially where getting away from microdeposits and logging on behalf of the user directly into the account might both solve an issue of a friction for a user in terms of getting a microdeposit, confirming it as an extra step. So this may be something that one could be ahead of. But yeah, I think taking over data aggregators, not directly for perpetrating crime itself, but access to information is similar to how it will play out if they had unauthorized access to the bureau information, right? Is actually a much more detailed view and analysis available to a fraudster to further perpetrate fraud.
Great information. We have a little time left for some frequently asked questions. So let me tee the first one up. Where do biometrics fit in? Are they a potential replacement of SMS-based two-factor authentication? Stacy?
Sure, yeah, I'll start on that one, and it'd be great if Irfan could jump in as well. So the way TeleSign views biometrics is they are great for logging into an account that's already set up on your device, specifically like your mobile device. Very convenient, you can log right in. At the same time, they don't really solve the problem of the initial linking of your account to your mobile device. So if you have an account online already, you need some way to put that account on your mobile device initially and prove that it's you. So that is not something that Biometrics currently does very well. That is something that's very, that works really well with two-factor authentication. And also Biometrics, doesn't have a great, there's no great way to use biometrics currently, like on your desktop device. And a lot of people were predicting that desktop devices weren't going to be around forever, but they still seem to be, one of the preferred methods of working. I think it's going to be hard to get away from them, at least for quite a while. So, and then the one other thing that I've heard is some people definitely have questions around the long-term viability of biometrics as it relates to both privacy and, if that data leaks somehow, so especially if it's a cloud-related or a cloud-based biometric service, if the data somehow leaks, there's no way to redo your biometrics. Like with a password, you can change your password. With a PIN code, it's always changing. Biometrics are forever, right? So that's another thing to think about when it comes to, just the future of biometrics as a login device.
Right.
Yeah, I would say I'm fully aligned. I think Stacy is spot on. A couple of things on this, right, and specifically as it relates to us. So spot on the point that establishing an account is something where it doesn't exist. So two-factor authentication essentially gets you to register or set up. But then also this ends up being a really good use case. Biometrics, even going beyond your sort of Touch ID or your Face ID, essentially the idea, the way that you do your keystrokes on a computer, which could potentially solve for a desktop use case. But I think the lack of high velocity and repeat transactions in an ecosystem such as ours, where the users, unlike a card portfolio or others, where users are establishing a pattern and therefore identifying an anomaly from that pattern based off biometrics becomes easier and simpler. I think it's much more complicated. So, yeah, I don't see this as an imminent threat or a replacement for two-factor authentication. So I'm aligned with you. I think those are good thoughts.
Got it. Why has the phone number become the de facto worldwide identifier?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a few different answers to that. One is that, the phone number is it's global. It's something that people have around the world. And I saw somewhere a statistic, basically that SMS is the most used technology in the world. I mean, basically, it's more used. More people have access to SMS than television, than computers, than the internet. It is really, if not the most, definitely one of the most used technologies in the world. Something over 6 billion people have access to text messaging. And so that's one reason. Another reason is because it's relatively uniform worldwide. Even though obviously there are different formats for numbers, it's not like, a social security number or something like that that's very specific to one country. And as everyone knows, the world is global at this point. Internet companies are global. They're not typically, they're not typically confined to one area, and so they need a global solution. And finally, the namespace of phone numbers is quite limited. So even though it might seem unlimited, it really isn't. It's confined to a certain number of digits. You can only have up to 15 digits in any international number. There's nothing. The phone system doesn't handle higher than that at the moment. And so it's a limited namespace, unlike something like an email where, it's pretty much infinite, right? You can create an email out of thin air at any given moment, and it can pretty much have any number of characters on either side. So that's why it really helps to identify someone on a global scale, and helps to limit really the number of possibilities of users. Really sort of ties people down to one account is what we're trying to do there.
Stacy, how difficult is it to integrate the TeleSign solution?
So it's really actually quite simple. It's all REST-based APIs, very easy to use. Your developer can probably have an example up and running in, 15 minutes. And the score part, so we offer both a model, basically a base model that can be used by any clients without any training. It's all based on the training that we've done ourselves internally and, across our entire client base. And then to have a more customized model is also quite simple. Our data science team typically works with our clients' data science teams and grabs some labeled data and makes a custom model, which is then automatically integrated. So once you have, score integrated in the back end, you don't have to do any additional work to benefit from the custom model. So it's all very simple, very easy for developers to integrate.
Yeah, I would agree with the experience. I think we started off with the earlier version of the score, and as we migrated to score 2.0, it was completely seamless on our part.
Excellent. Here's one more question for both of you. What does fraud in 2025 look like?
So I'll start off that one. And basically, a few thoughts there. One, I'm kind of excited to see what fraud in 2025 looks like. These fraudsters are so creative and so smart that I'm constantly fascinated by what they're coming up with. At the same time, it's kind of terrifying. The more things are connected to the internet, so the more we have, smart homes, smart devices, lots of IoT happening. I mean, there's just a lot of space to manipulate. There's a lot of data to steal, a lot of opportunity for fraud to expand. And so I think it will definitely be an interesting time. And I think that we'll continue to see usage of advanced technologies and exploitation of advanced technologies to bring about totally new forms of fraud and, nefarious behavior.
Yeah, I'd add to that thesis that essentially, given the preponderance of synthetic identities and the way fraudsters creatively work, I think the phishing itself would evolve in a significant way. Larger network of people, information, in terms of piecing together bits of information together, I think that would become challenging to work against. As platforms grow, as any given portfolios grow, account takeover in any portfolio becomes bigger. And then with these phishing techniques, if you have unauthorized access to these, I think you can, perpetrate a significant damage on that. I would add that. Some other changes that are happening across Europe, I think it's more around sort of open banking platforms. How, again, through account takeovers and stuff, how is it that you're able to get in there and perpetrate fraud? I think those are the watch outs for me over the next 5 years or so.
Excellent. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's webcast. I want to give a big thanks to our speakers, Stacy Stubblefield of TeleSign and Irfan Tareen of Equifax, for sharing their expertise and insights with us. And thanks especially to you, our viewers, for tuning in. Please be sure to check out the resource section on your console for links to some valuable TeleSign resources. Also, if you have a question or comment about this webcast, just type it into the Q&A box in your console and press the submit button. We'll get back to you with an answer within a few days. For TeleSign and IDG, I'm Tom Schmidt.